Hey guys, Chris with Nichols Retirement Empire. We finished up with all our family food fight stuff for the most part. So, that was a real experience, crazy stuff. Um, but anyway, I haven't told you guys this before. Uh, you know, it's not my first brush with fame. Hanging around with, famous people of notoriety. It's just something that's happened to me in my life. My grandmother, she worked at and this is gonna, when this story starts off, you're gonna say, well, what? This is crazy. But anyway, my grandmother worked third shift back when I was a little kid. In a place called the Orange Hut, which is kind of like a huddle house. And, it was in Redbank, Tennessee, near Chattanooga. And she lived in Rossville, Georgia, which is on the other side of Chattanooga. But anyway, that was where she worked, like as a waitress and a cook. I think she kind of did a little of everything there. But anyway, and so my grandmother, when she would get off her third shift job, would go by where my dad worked in Chattanooga and pick me and my sister up and take us to her house, and then we could walk to the elementary school. So we were there all the time, because every day that we went to school, we were at her house in the morning and then in the afternoon until my mom and dad got off work. It's just a convenient thing for us. So my grandmother was a really good cook, very good. And she was, if you grew up in the 60s and 70s, and I don't know how it was in other parts of the country, but in the South, it was pretty traditional for people, just to stop by where you lived and just visit you. Because you didn't have social media, you didn't have, and like the other day we had a person come by our house, and this doesn't happen much anymore, but a person came by our house and they just, was somebody that knew us from a long time ago. Went to school with Tammy, that kind of stuff, and they just came in and stopped in and, hey, how y'all doing? And we talked for a while and they left. And my daughter was like, what was that all about? And we're like, he just stopped by to see us. And she was like, why? Amy, that's just what people used to do. People used to, you'd be riding down the road and you'd, hey, let's go see so-and-so. And you'd just stop at their house and they'd let you in and you'd talk and, eat a piece of cake or something, you just visited. And so anyway, that was a lot more common. People lived close to each other and stuff like that. Where she lived, there was a mill there. It was a mill town. So anyway, she always had food. Like, she always had a pot of pinto beans. She always had some cornbread. She always had some biscuits from that morning, some chicken she made from the day. She always had all this food. And what was so crazy is that most of it was just out on the table. And it was on the table, maybe with a little cloth over it or something, and it just is out there all day. And we would eat it all day, and nobody ever got sick. Nobody ever, you didn't worry about germs. You didn't worry about, all this stuff. You just ate it. It was just out, sitting out. People would come over there all the time. They'd sit at the table, eat something, drink a cup of coffee. She had a coconut cake or whatever. She just always had something to eat. So people came over there all the time. Nothing unusual, relatives, friends, whatever. So anyway, one day this guy comes over, and I was probably in about third or fourth grade, and my grandmother said, do you know who this guy is? And I was like, no, I couldn't, he kind of looked familiar, but I couldn't place who he was. And she said, this is Dr. Schaack. Now, if you're from the Chattanooga area, back when you used to really have real local television, there was a show called Schaack Theater. And obviously, by the name, Schaack Theater would play stuff like Creature from the Black Lagoon, Wolfman, Frankenstein, the outer space movies. I mean, any kind of science fiction or horror movie was played on Schaack Theater. and he was the host. Dr. Schaack was the host, and then he had there was a puppet that was his sidekick named Dingbat. And Dingbat, would always say all this crazy stuff, and Dr. Schaack would take his cane and he'd hit Dingbat with the cane and knock him off his perch, on the, and they always were, like they'd show the movie and then they would, make jokes about the movie or talk about, whatever. They're always, it was funny. And it would come on Saturday night. It was the only night that I could stay up late and watch, because we loved, those movies. Everybody watched those old black and white movies, and some of them were in color, but it was the scary movies, So all the kids would stay up late and watch Schaack Theater. Now, on Schaack Theater, they were always talking about, Dr. Schaack would always talk about Redbank Rena. And Redbank Rena and Dingbat would do this thing. He would go, alert, alert, alert. And then they would do like a little fake news story. And it was always funny, something goofy, like just really corny jokes, stuff like that. Like, the old Johnny Carson kind of jokes kind of thing. So anyway, they would always talk about Redbank Rena did this. Redbank Rena, I saw Redbank Rena this week and she did. And I had no idea. But when they were talking about Redbank Rena, that was my grandmother. My grandmother's name was Rena. And Dr. Schaack, because that was a live show, on Saturday nights, he would, after the show, he would go, and you can imagine what kind of characters would be at the Orange Hut in Redbank, Tennessee at 2 and 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, back in the 70s. And so it was just a really crazy thing for me to realize, hey, this is Dr. Schaack sitting at my grandmother's table, and my grandmother, I don't know why I never put this together, but my grandmother is Redbank Rena. It's a character that he talks about all the time on Schaack Theater that every kid watches. Everybody watches Schaack Theater because, there wasn't but 3 channels. There wasn't anything else to watch. There wasn't any social media. On Saturday night, you stayed up late and you watched Schaack Theater to watch the scary movies. So everybody knew who that was. And so, or all my friends, did. So anyway, I was just like, wow, so anyway, he signs me an autograph and all that kind of stuff. And, and I was just in awe. Here's Dr. Schaack right here, right in front of me right now. So I looked up some, I looked up on YouTube, and there were a couple of websites that were kind of dedicated to these old horror movie hosts and to Dr. Schaack and Chattanooga and stuff like that back then. And they sure enough mentioned my grandmother and Redbank Rena, and that was one of the people that he talked about and all that kind of stuff. So that was just really cool as a kid. And it gave me a lot of street cred at South Rossville Elementary School to be able to say that my grandmother was Redbank Rena. And like when she came to pick me up sometimes after school, I could point out to that 067 Malibu and go, hey guys, Redbank Rena's here to pick me up. That was so crazy. But anyway, that was my first brush with fame and fortune. Redbank Rena. Hope you guys do a little research on that. Do a little research on Dr. Schaack, Schaack Theater, Chattanooga. But anyway, have a good day. Nichols Retirement Empire. Grandson of Redbank Rena.